Thank you for listening to this podcast from TRE, Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain and around the world. For more information, please visit tre.radio.
Joining us on the line now is Henry Milner. He's been one of the UK's top criminal defence solicitors for more than 40 years, during which time he's defended some of the most infamous names in recent criminal history. He's with us on the book show to talk about his new novel, Miracles Cost Extra. It's an explosive, true-to-life thriller that delivers a stunningly authentic look at how justice can be bent, bought or broken. It takes readers deep inside the world of high-stakes prison breaks, underworld fixers and the shadowy border between law and crime. Welcome to the show, Henry.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us. So how did you get into law? How did you become a criminal defense lawyer?
It was an accident. My teacher at boarding school, the careers master, suggested I went to the College of Estate Management in Kensington. And we used to say about him, he'd ruined more lives than Al Capone. So after 2 years wasting my time there, it was decided I couldn't draw. But I'd done well in the law exam there, the property law. So the principal there called me in and said, "This is no good for you. I'm prepared to recommend you to any university to study law because you came top in 2 years and bottom in building construction, and you can't work a theodolite. Where would you like to go?" So I thought, well, I'd heard the London School of Economics was a 3-year holiday camp. So I said there, and he wrote me a letter, and I went in with it and tried to get in that year. Unfortunately, they were full up for that year, and they told me to apply the next year. But then the lady who was in charge of admissions did me a real favor and put me on the list, which had 69 people on, and they're entitled to have 70. And she made an exception, and in I slipped.
Amazing.
I spent 3 years there. And then I finally got a job for £5 a week with a criminal firm, which only had one person in it and his secretary, who specialized in defending serious crimes. And so I did my articles there for 2 years at £5 a week. And then he wouldn't make me a partner straight away and wanted to pay me £26 a week, which wasn't any good to me. So I went into a divorce firm in Knightsbridge for 6 months, which was as much as I could take with the stories I heard. And finally, I was offered to open a criminal law department in the East End with a firm that had no criminal law department and no cases, but there's plenty of crime in that area. And so I went in there, and after 3 years there, I had 4 cases and took them with me and opened up in the West End and took my chances. And then I was lucky enough to be offered a case defending in the Daily Express robbery in Fleet Street, where £175,000 was stolen at gunpoint, and by some miracle the client was acquitted, and he was sharing a cell, I should say, with another man who was charged with murder. And when he heard of his acquittal, he changed to me, and he knew some of the people who were arrested for the Brinks-Mat robbery. And so I got that case as well. And then I got the Kenny Noy murder case of the policeman in the back garden, and it moved on, luckily, to John Goldfinger Palmer and Freddie Foreman, who used to be involved before when I was still at boarding school with the Crays. So that was it. So not being able to draw resulted in my becoming a criminal lawyer.
Yeah. And how do you sort of describe what it means to be a criminal lawyer? Because you're defending people who have been accused of a crime. Is that what it comes down to?
Problem is that people wonder how you could defend someone you believe to be guilty or virtually know to be guilty.
Well, yeah, that's a good question.
But the moral answer that everybody gives, every lawyer gives, is, well, everybody's entitled to be defended. The prosecution have their best man prosecuting it, so the defendant has a lawyer acting for him. But the reality is not every case is black and white. So if you take, for example, a person who's charged with murder, he might claim he was acting in self-defense or he was provoked. A man charged with a bank robbery might say that he was the getaway driver and he didn't know guns were going to be used. A person who agrees to store a suitcase overnight for his friend may claim he didn't know they had cocaine inside. So not every case is clear-cut. And anyway, these days, what with DNA evidence and telephone printouts, there's many more pleas of guilty because the cases are insurmountable. The evidence is overwhelming, particularly because of the telephone printouts.
Yeah. So do you get given cases then when, I mean, can you refuse a case? Do you get given a case and you're like, well, clearly this guy is guilty and there's enough evidence to show that he's guilty. I'm not going to defend him. Does that happen?
It shouldn't happen because if he wants to plead guilty, it's his problem. If he gets convicted, having pleaded not guilty, he'll get a much longer sentence than if he pleads guilty. You can get a 30% discount if you plead guilty. So a person who's facing, let's say, a serious drug dealer who's facing 18 years for smuggling, if he pleads guilty, he might end up with 12 years. Out of which these days he only serves 40%. So it's a bit of a joke, really, because for a serious case, you could end up serving 40% of 12 years. So you can serve about 5 years.
Yeah. But excuse my ignorance, but as a criminal defense lawyer, do you presumably don't want them to plead guilty, do you? Are you always trying to show that they're innocent or not necessarily?
No.
Okay.
If they ask you, which they will do, what are my prospects? And you say, well, your prospects are virtually nil. They don't have to take my advice. They can still fight the case if they've got a defense. It's not for me to believe or disbelieve their case and to put my best foot forward. But they risk getting a far longer sentence, and that's why the courts give a discount to try and make sure they've got room to take on cases and to persuade people to plead guilty where the case is hopeless. It doesn't always happen. And sometimes you can be wrong and the case is hopeless and suddenly it comes to life during the trial and then they get acquitted.
Yeah, interesting.
On the other hand, you can have a case which you think is a pretty likely winner where something can go devastatingly wrong during the trial itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, new evidence seems to come to light all the time, doesn't it? Which can change things dramatically.
Yes, it can. And particularly with the forensic skills these days.
Yeah. Okay, so let's hear a bit about your new thriller, Miracles Cost Extra. Tell us about your characters.
Well, the main character, Big J Davenport, appeared in my original book, Murder at the Bailey, and he's the numero uno in the London underworld. He's number one, and I molded him from 4 separate people I've met in my career. And he's very intelligent, and he's streetwise, and he's experienced, and he's rich, and he doesn't pay income tax. And he's coming to the end of his career and is seriously thinking about retirement. And he's never been convicted, although he's been on trial 5 times at the Old Bailey. And he has a sidekick who's a very intelligent, small little man who I've nicknamed Half Pint. And he's been working him for years. It's for so many years that Big J can't remember what his real name is because he calls him Half Pint. And he's got another large sidekick who's been with him for 15 years. So there's a trio of them, and they were the main characters in my original fiction book, Murder at the Bailey, and they now reappear in this one. And this book revolves around a self-made millionaire who comes home unexpectedly to find his wife engaged in sex on his beautiful Italian leather couch and loses it and half kills the man there. kicks him out the house without his shoes, sits down and gets drunk, and then decides that that's not enough punishment and drives around to the Frenchman's restaurant, that's the one who's having sex with his wife, and walks into his office at the back in a full restaurant and asks him how long he's been having sex with his wife. And the Frenchman doesn't answer, which tells him that it must have been considerable time, loses his temper and because of drunkenness, picks up the Frenchman's letter opener on the desk and finishes him off and sits down in a chair, and the police are called and off he goes to prison awaiting trial for murder. A little bit more I can add. Then he decides that his lawyers tell him he's got no prospect of getting off. And he decides that 20 years in prison is not for him if he stands trial. So he asked his best friend, who's a merchant banker, who had known each other for years and years, when he visits him, to find out who's the most powerful man in London, most powerful criminal in London. And so he researches it on the internet, and he comes up with the name Big J Davenport and gets an inquiry agent to follow him for a week and then report back to him, and so that he can somehow arrange a meeting. I won't take it any further than that, but he goes from there.
Yeah.
Because he's got to get out of prison. He can, and he doesn't care what it costs, but he's got to get out, and he can't afford to stand trial because he hasn't got a prayer.
Amazing. And I mean, is this the kind of thing that can happen? Is this the kind of thing that you've dealt with in your career?
It could happen, yes, because some of the security systems in prison are not that great. I'm not talking about breaking him out with a machine gun. I'm talking about getting him out another way.
Yeah.
More clever than that, hopefully.
Yeah, clever stuff. So when you're writing a story like this, do you plan it in advance? Do you know exactly where the story is going to go, or do you just have an ending at the start?
You have an ending, you have a beginning, and the middle part's the problem. Unfortunately, I write everything by hand, and then I dictate it, and I send it through to my PA, who types it, and she sends it back, and I correct it, and it goes backwards and forwards, and we end up moving around commas and changing words and avoiding fancy words because nobody wants to be impressed with long words. And you do it, hopefully, for that not only can people involved in crime enjoy, but the public generally.
Yeah.
So I try to make it accessible.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Well, there's a huge fascination, isn't there, with what goes on in a courtroom. People enjoy reading about it or watching about it because a lot of people might never, ever be in a courtroom.
Well, before TV, it was the best form of entertainment in London. You could go to the Old Bailey, sit in the public gallery and see a different show every day for free.
Do people still do that?
You do get people in the public gallery who in fact, sometimes in some courts, I used to see this lady there. I used to go and ask her opinion of the verdict, and she was never wrong. She was like the 13th juror.
Amazing. Brilliant. And do you can you see there ever being a different way? You know, it's been discussed without, much seriousness, I suppose, over the years, but the idea of getting rid of a jury and finding a different way to do it. What do you think of that?
Well, they're trying to do it to try and get rid of the 70,000 cases backlog. I don't think that what they're doing will help at all. What they need is a cull. What I mean by that is to cure the backlog. They need to let people out of prison who are serving sentences much earlier, and also to get rid of a lot of the small cases awaiting trial, even though people might be guilty, to draw the line and say, okay, anybody who's in for shoplifting, who's in for a small banking fraud, we're just going to let them out. And that way you go back to zero and start again. So that there never used to be a backlog in the old days. If you had a murder case, you'd be on trial within 3 months.
Yeah.
Now you can wait. I've got a case which was fixed last year, and the first date they could give for a week-long trial was October 2027.
What?
Yes, so it's over 2 years till the trial. It's farcical.
Yeah, that's
and
crazy.
It's not fair on the people who are the complainant, and it's not fair on the defendant. It's pathetic.
Yeah,
but they won't cure it. They won't cure it, in my view. They won't cure it with what they're trying to do. If they do, it'll take years and years and years. What they need is an immediate cure, and I don't think that they're going to get it.
Yeah. And there's been various sort of documentary dramas about jury service over the years, which I've found fascinating, where they've got different groups of people judging the same trial and they come up with a different answer. And it kind of shows you it depends on who those jurors are, their background, their experiences, and where their views and opinions come from, which is obviously fascinating.
Sometimes you get one powerful person on a jury, and you can usually pick them out by looking at the 12. And he probably runs the whole show. Because you'll get many who are uncertain, particularly in marginal cases. And that's probably why you got... I think the show they had on television, you could see that one of the jurors was more powerful than the other 11.
Yeah.
And that's why they came to a different verdict to the other jury who were hearing the same trial.
Yeah. And what about how sometimes there doesn't seem to be a set amount of years that people are in prison for a particular crime? You know, you often see somebody going to prison for doing something quite serious, like rape or murder, getting less time than someone going in for a financial fraud or something like that. How does that happen?
I tell you why, because the newspapers don't give you all the facts.
Right.
They give you the enticing facts, but when you hear the whole story, even in murder cases, which may turn out to be manslaughter, sometimes people are terribly provoked, and it can be a build-up of certain things happening. Or even with a drug smuggler, he may have been involved on one occasion to raise money to pay for his mother's operation or something like that. Mm-hmm. These sort of points never appear in the newspaper. You just get the bland facts, and it stands out, well, this is ridiculous, that this fraudster got 14 years for a big fraud, but a rapist got 6 years for 2 rapes.
Yeah.
And you don't know whether the person he's convicted of raping was his wife, girlfriend, or happened at a Christmas party when they were both drunk or whatever.
Yeah. Interesting. Well,
it's not very, it doesn't look very fair on the face of it, I agree.
No. Well, if people want to get more of an insight, they should definitely get a copy of Miracles Cost Extra. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Henry Milner, who we've been chatting with today. Henry, thanks so much for joining us.
A real pleasure. Thank you.
The Book Show with Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Sam Steele. That's the pseudonym of Sarah Steele, USA Today bestselling author of The Missing Pieces of Nancy Moon and other sweeping historical fiction. She trained as a classical pianist and violinist before joining the world of publishing as an editorial assistant at Hodder and Stoughton. She's with us on the Book Show to talk about her debut crime fiction novel. It's called 5 Silver Spoons, and it's book 1 in a new series about Hope Fenton. It's a revenge story with a killer picking off the privileged Cambridge students who buried him alive 20 years before. It's a gripping tale of shameless entitlement and merciless revenge. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you for having me. And I have to say, having heard that, if I hadn't written it, I'd probably want to read it.
Oh, well, that's good. I suppose that makes sense to write the kind of book that you want to read, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, you do live with these things for very many months and sometimes years. So, yeah, you've got to like what you're writing and you've got to feel invested in it.
Yeah, for sure. So this is very different to previous books that you've written, is it?
It is, yeah. So I've done 6 historical fiction novels, 3 of which are World War II based stories. There's a couple set in the 60s, and I've just published one called The French Riviera, which is, funnily enough, set on the French Riviera in the 20s and 30s. So that's all about the Golden Age. So, yes, this is very different. I'm just thinking about my World War II books. There's a lot of peril in those, and Nazis and chasing around and stuff. So I suppose there are some kind of parallels. But yeah, this is very much a departure, and it's nice to be writing something contemporary.
Yeah. And what made you want to do something different?
I think in anything in life, it's good to just have a change, kind of mix things up a bit, flex the brain. And I've always wanted to have a go at this. And someone very close to me is actually a forensic scientist. And we were chatting, and a mutual friend said, "Oh, you two should do a book together." And it just kind of, I just got on with it, and then came back to this person and asked for advice on forensic procedure. But it's just been so much fun. I mean, my browser history is probably enough to put me in prison. I just try to think the things I have to look up these days. So, yeah, it was a sort of chance conversation, and then that kind of, that's what I want to do. So, off I went.
So what came first to you? Was it the idea of particular characters or a story?
I've long had in mind a story about a group of entitled people causing an accident and the repercussions. It's something I've played with for about 20 years probably, and then I just thought this is the perfect vehicle for it if I'm going to do a police procedural. And then it was a case of finding my character. So my main character, DI Hope Fenton, her ex-husband is a forensic scientist, so I needed to sort of work them out. So yeah, I kind of found Hope bit by bit. I sort of worked out her age, I worked out what she looked like, I worked out the kind of music she listens to, what makes her cross, what makes her happy. Then I realised she lives on a houseboat in London. And suddenly, once you start putting a few things together, these people just appear to you. And then they take the story over, really. Yeah. Sometimes when I'm writing Hope, as I have been this morning, I just feel like I'm just following her in her trail, just mopping it all up with words.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a bit about her as a person.
So it is a cliche, I know, but she is a flawed detective. But I've tried to make her not cliched. She has an interesting backstory in that she had twins with her ex-husband, and one of them, Noah, was kidnapped when he was 6. And in the years that have followed, it's been presumed that he's dead. So she has this awful backstory. I mean, awful for anybody, but for the kind of the publicity surrounding a detective whose child has gone missing is horrendous. So that's kind of framed her. It's given her some problems. She probably drinks a bit too much. She's quite snippy with people. She's not the easiest person, but she's loyal. If you're on her team and you work hard, she will fight to the death for you. Yeah. So she's complicated, but I like her, and she's very witty. She's got a great sense of humour. She just, some of her one-liners make me laugh out loud.
And has it been fun and interesting delving into police procedurals and trying to work out how it all works to make it realistic for the book?
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, I do watch rather a lot of 24 Hours in Police Custody and real CSI forensics, bit obsessed with that. But yeah, it's fascinating. I'm fortunate to have made friends with a couple of police officers who are really handy for asking about stuff. And people like to share. Most people know someone who's in the business, and people are really happy. I was in Italy on holiday and met a retired detective from Greater Manchester who was amazing. I had a whole evening with him telling me about stuff and murder cases because he'd been on the murder squad. So it does make me think, in another life, I think I'd quite like to have been a detective. Not sure I've been any good, but it's fascinating. I think we're all fascinated by it.
Yeah, absolutely. And how lovely meeting people who are so generous with their time and happy to share stories.
Yeah, I mean, I find that in all of my writing, I always seek out experts. And I wrote a book about art forgery, and I met some amazing people. I went to the British Museum and got a tour of the private, the old master drawings. I went around the Courtauld. I mean, just incredible. People are so generous. And I have to say, the only time I have encountered a barrier when asking for advice. I was trying to get some advice on defamation law, because I had this book had a case where someone was taken to court for defamation. So I found a firm of defamation lawyers and asked if they could help. And he said, yeah. He said, okay, let's fix up a phone chat. I said, great, happy to buy someone lunch or whatever. And then he emailed me through the list of prices of how much it was going to cost me for an informal thing. Just for a bit of author research. Okay, so he says, so it starts at £500 an hour.
Oh,
and
goodness.
We will have to charge you the full hour. I thought, you know what, there's Google, I'll be fine. And then I found a friend of my son's is actually a fledgling barrister, and she gave me a whole afternoon talking me through stuff. So there is hope for the legal profession. But yeah, that did make me laugh. The only time I've ever encountered a bit of trickiness and unwillingness with that.
Shocking. So did you decide when you were planning to write this book that it was going to be the first in a series? Was that the idea from the start?
Yes, because I mean, Hope's got so much going, and with her backstory with the child, and there's a further backstory with her father, who was a DCI, who we discover has been involved in some very controversial case that's alluded to. So I'm going to be going back and exploring that there. And there's grudges with the local criminal gang. So there's a lot to play with.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of crime in London. She's got lots to do.
Mm-hmm. And without giving too much away, can you tell us a bit about what happens in this first book then, 5 Silver Spoons?
So we start off with someone crawling out of a shallow grave, vowing vengeance on whoever has buried him there. And then we move to 5 different characters who live in London. They're all wealthy. They're all, there's a paediatric surgeon, there's an MP, a university lecturer, and one by one, they all receive a postcard of their old Cambridge college. And it says on them, one of them gets a card saying, "You're first," he's found dead. And the others all receive a card saying, "Who's next?" So we know that they're all going to be picked off one by one. So they've got to find out who is doing this, who they buried, and how determined he is to, or she, to find them.
Yeah, exciting. So when you've got a book that's got twists and turns and things, do you need to plan it all out beforehand, or?
To an extent, I'm a bit of what we call in the business a pantser. So I like to kind of follow the investigation with my characters. I quite like not having surprises, because I think maybe that helps the reader. If I don't know what's going to happen as I write it, I hope the readers get a sense that they won't know either. I mean, obviously I go back once I got to the end and I know exactly what's happened at the end. I go back and hone things. But yeah, I like to just keep plowing through. So the ending, I think I wrote the ending for 5 Silver Spoons. I was in France on a writing retreat and I wrote it in 6 hours. I did 6,000 words kind of without stopping, because I was at the end of this book and I was so excited trying to see what was going to happen, kind of writing it in real time almost. Almost missed my gin and tonic at supper time. So engrossed was I. I like a little bit of mystery. I know people who plan everything, and I've seen their kind of maps of every single chapter, every single scene. I do that to an extent, but then I like to just see where things go. And also characters, introduce new things. You don't necessarily know everything that's going to happen. A character might lead you down a different path, or you think of something new. So I quite like being flexible about it.
So did you start the book without knowing who did what?
I knew the premise, so I knew that these 5 people had done something, but I hadn't worked out. So I killed off the first of them, and then I had to sort of sit and think, okay, so what's next? And then obviously you have to introduce little red herrings, and you can't make it too easy for the detective or for the reader. And I didn't know how each of them was going to be killed until I got to particular scenes. So, there was a bit of forward planning for that. But, so I had my premise and then I just went with it. It's like kind of sitting at the beginning of a film, just watching it happen.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And I have to ask you about working at Hodder & Stoughton. So what does an editorial assistant entail?
Oh, so this is my first job from university. And it was the best job in the world. We had a fridge in the corner of the office that had wine in it.
Wow.
I know. It was the days of lots of wine in publishing, and it was full of young women, and we just had such, I'm not sure how much work we did. There was probably a lot of flirting with authors and being out for drinks and stuff. But I loved it. I learned so much. In fact, my boss there is still at Hodder, and she's still amazing, and she taught me so much. And they trained me up to edit and to prepare manuscripts, so it stood me in such good stead over the years. I did it freelance for many years until my children were born, and then I had to hand back a manuscript one day that was literally stuck together with jam with scribbles all over it. Okay, maybe not.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing, though. So you obviously got a real sense of what works and what doesn't work in terms of writing novels.
Yeah. And I read lots. I mean, I've always read lots, but for work, I'd go home with pieces off the slush pile, as we used to call it, every weekend. And, we all had tons to read and report on. So I got to know, I got to read an awful lot of stuff. And as a writer, you have to read lots. You have to be critical. You have to learn from other people. It's such an important part of the job, and I continue to read loads and loads.
Yeah. So the next book is hopefully coming out next year. Have you thought or planned ahead as to how many there might be in the series?
I'm planning. I've got 4 or 5 in my head at the moment.
Great.
So, I'm taking it one at a time. But yeah, I've got ideas, because some of the stories, the backstory, the family stories for the Fentons will take time to unravel. I can't feed too much in too quickly.
No.
But yeah, I'm just cantering towards the end of book 2 at the moment, first draft, which will need a bit of knocking into shape. But it's really nice to be at the stage where I've got a list of the final scenes now, and I know what's going to happen, and it's just fun writing it up, really. It's like filling in the gaps.
Brilliant. Well, if people want to get a copy of 5 Silver Spoons, it's out now. It's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Sam Steele, who we've been chatting with. Sam, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been really good fun.
You're listening to The Book Show with Hannah Murray on TRE.
Joining us on the line now is Susan Barrett, who gave up a job in TV production to be at home with young children and to do what she always secretly wanted to do, write. She's with us on the book show to talk about her latest novel, All Cats Are Grey. It's a literary Gothic tale enacted in the ruins of London just after the Blitz, and it was inspired by the real-life murderer, the Blackout Ripper, Gordon Cummings. Welcome to the book show, Susan.
Thank you very much, Hannah. It's very nice to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. So apart from this one, do you know where your inspiration comes from with all of the novels?
Well, deep dives into research. I'm very interested in nooks and crannies. So I've covered all sorts of things in previous books, including post-mortem photography in Victorian times, in which people took photographs of dead children to remember them by, because they didn't have any living ones. They died so quickly and so in such perfect quantities. I know, it's terrible, isn't it? And I'd actually written a book which never sort of made it off the computer, history about poisoning, and I wanted to include that in this book, which it is, although Gordon Cummings is not a poisoner. And I just find the Second World War extremely fascinating time. In some ways I started thinking about it in COVID, and I was thinking the blackout is rather similar to what we went through, sort of enforced seclusion at home, fear if you went out. And so I was sort of thinking about that, and I often do with novels that most of my novels are set in the past, that's finding some sort of link with the present, which I find very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think also, I am fascinated by crime and murder, as many women are, which is a curious thing, I think, because, we are victims of murderers, whether in the home or serial killers. It's mostly women who die. And yet women are very fascinated by that subject, both writing about it and consuming it, reading and watching TV shows, both about detectives and true crime, about serial killers. And I was sort of thinking about why that is. And maybe it's because we are going to be more likely to be the victims of it, and yet we're the consumers of it also. And I think it's because we want to have we want to deep dive, we want to confront it, we want to face it. And mostly that's because there will be some resolution. Either the detective will solve the crime. Usually it's that the detective will solve the crime and the murderer will be brought to justice. But I also think it's because women have got, I don't know, we're being frightened when we're out and about. And that makes us sort of stronger in a kind of way. We want to confront it, but we're also able to cope with the idea. And the other thing about women having sort of stronger stomachs than men is something that the poisoning aspect comes back into, that I think women will be more likely to be poisoners and not always caught because they're very good at it, simply because they have stronger stomachs. They're used to bodily fluids, they're used to careful planning and meticulousness, which I think a lot of serial killers are not. And they also have access to poisons, because they can buy sort of products on the high street. They can administer easily as well, and they're forward planners, which I think many men aren't. But anyway, going back to Gordon Cummings, yes, he was a real person, and he was a serial murderer who operated in the blackout, which was a very unlawful time in England because there wasn't a lot of police presence, and the bombing actually covered a lot of crime. So you could easily kill somebody and just put their body on a bomb site, and nobody would really know what the cause of death was. Was it a bomb or was it a serial killer? And I think he got away with about, 4 or 5 crimes. But in a kind of way, I didn't want to focus on him so much because I think he's an appalling person, and I do want him to be brought to justice, which he is. But I was more interested in a way in the victim. I want the victim's name to be known, not his, in a way that the last person who is his potential victim is not going to just be known as murdered girl number 4. She's going to have a name, she's going to survive, and she's going to have a life to live. So I thought that was, an interesting route to go down, really. Yeah.
So did you find out enough information about the people that he killed, or have you had to make a lot of it up?
Not really, no. I mean, he was the jumping off point in a way, rather than the sort of focus of attention. As I say, I don't want to focus attention on him because I think he doesn't deserve to be remembered. Like Sarah Everard, that was another thing that I was very influenced by, the murder of Sarah Everard, which again women responded to in an enormous way. It was the vast majority of people who gathered at Clapham on Clapham Common to commemorate her were women, and it was appalling scenes of sort of the police kind of dragging them away because they weren't supposed to congregate. It was during COVID again. But I want to remember Sarah Everard, not Cousins, who was her killer, really.
Yeah.
But the other premise behind this is that in this case, it's not a detective that gives resolution at the end. It's these 4 very disparate people. They're 2 men and 2 women, some of whom know each other, some of whom don't. And they come together to stop him in his tracks, really. They take justice into their own hands, which is, whether it's right or wrong is, as sort of another matter. But to them, it seems like a necessary murder. And each of the 4 of them have actually killed somebody else in their own past, which is what equips them really to come together to do this murder. So the murder is murdered. The murderer is murdered.
And that's all made up, yeah? This isn't truth.
This is all made up, right, yes.
Yeah. Amazing. So how much did you actually take from fact? Was it just the idea of this guy and then the rest came from you, or...?
It was, yes. It was just the idea of this guy. It was just, well, it's true, and and it is true that the blackout was a time of, and the war itself was a time of, very high crime rates, most of which were looting and pillaging and the black market. But there's an awful lot of stuff that went on that wasn't kind of acknowledged at the time, I think.
And was it nice immersing yourself in that period of history and imagining what it was like?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I really, as I say, I really do enjoy sort of doing historical research and trying to imagine myself back into that time. And I think growing up in London, sort of in the 70s, late 60s and 70s, the war was still sort of all around us, really. There were still lots of bomb sites apparent, with buddleia growing on them. And people still talked about the war. There were still people alive who'd sort of lived through it. And for many people, it was the most exciting time in their life, really. If something terrible hadn't happened to them.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And what about the title of the book, All Cats Are Grey? Where does that come from?
Well, I suppose it's this idea that anybody's capable of anything, in the dark. Who knows what goes on? There might be hidden motivations, and you can never quite trust that somebody is who appears what they appear to be.
And what's the connection with the title to that?
Well, because these people they seem to be one thing. The four people who are the murderers seem to be one thing, but actually in their hidden past is something quite different, which is that they have killed people.
Mm. So do you do much planning with the books? Do you know exactly where you're going before you start writing?
I'd say not really. I did have this sort of idea that killers would kill a killer, and that it would be interesting to look at the morals of that in a way, because two wrongs make a right. I think they probably don't actually, but justice is usually comes from authority. It's the police or whatever. But I just thought it'd be quite interesting to look at how it can be taken into people's own hands. When they feel its attention is not being paid, and they must do something about it themselves. They're very driven to do something about it themselves because of their past experiences as well. Mm. And that sort of urgency that if they don't do something, there will be a fourth victim turning up on a bomb site. So I knew that. And then I think I sort of wrote into the story, and the characters begin to live. And as I got to know them, that they kind of, I know that's such a cliche, but they sort of write themselves. They take me in particular in surprising directions sometimes. So I had to keep pulling them back into line, really, and give everybody an equal voice, because I got more fascinated by some of them than the others, really. So it's quite a few different viewpoints, and also it starts off on a particular day in January the 2nd in 1942, when all these characters are introduced. And then the middle part of the book is looking at their history, what brings them to the point of getting together to kill the murderer. And then the last part of the book is speeds up again, and it just takes place over a matter of weeks when they plot Gordon and manage to do it.
Great. Well, if people want to get a copy of All Cats Are Grey, it's out now. It's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Susan Barrett, who we've been chatting with today. Susan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Hannah. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Talk Radio Europe.
Your voice in Spain.
Joining us on the line now is A.M. Belsey, who was born in Arkansas but moved to the UK at the age of 21. She works as a publisher and author and splits her time between London and Norfolk. She's with us on the book show to talk about her debut novella, 6 Miles Store. It's a tense, atmospheric and skillfully plotted book. It's described as a dark, twisty novella that will hold a relentless grip over you until its final, unpredictable conclusion. It's a literary thriller that weaves Southern Gothic tropes and a nerve-twisting plot to deliver an addictive and fast-paced read. Welcome to the book show, Angel.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
It's great to have you with us. So congratulations, your debut novella. Very exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, it is exciting. It took me a long time to get here.
So working in publishing and everything, were you inspired for a while to write your own book?
I had actually had the idea for this book for a very long time. I've been writing it for about 20 years, even though it's only a little novella. But yeah, I worked in a little gas station when I was at university. It's only over time and space from working there and having a different perspective because I moved to the United Kingdom a little bit later on, that I was able really to put the story together with any kind of like coherence. And yes, then working in publishing, I understood the industry enough to say, okay, this is how I want to publish my novella.
Yeah. And why did you decide to make it a novella as opposed to a full-length novel?
Well, I mean, some stories just take the amount of space that they need. It was actually originally just a short story. I'm actually, even though I published novels, mostly novels and a couple of memoirs, I really prefer short fiction. I've always been a short story writer throughout my life, although I've never really published anything. It's been only for my own enjoyment, really. And for me, the short form packs more of a punch because you have to get the idea across quickly without any kind of bloviating, or you can't take your time. You have to really get in there and pack a punch in straight away. And I like that. I like being able to take a concept and make it the most important thing about a story. So really, it was originally a short story, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And I worked with an editor to expand some of the ideas, but I got it to novella and thought, actually, the story is told. I don't want to go any further.
Yeah, fair enough. And can you tell us a bit about your time working at this gas station and why it inspired this story?
Sure, yeah. So I worked at this little place that sits kind of on a crossroads on a major thoroughfare. Although I say it's a major thoroughfare, Arkansas is a very rural place, so there wasn't that much traffic on this main highway. Then the other part of the crossroads, the crossing direction, went up to the middle of nowhere, the boonies, where all the people who lived way back in the backwoods lived. And so this store was a place where travelers who were kind of maybe not from the place, or, just trying to get from one place to another very quickly, would intersect with people who were very much entrenched in the rural life and rural culture of where we were. And we were, the girls who worked in the store, we saw this very broad cross-section of humanity every day. And we had regulars who we saw all the time, and we had strangers who we never saw again. And it was just... it was such an interesting time in my life. In fact, it's the most favorite job I've ever had, meeting and interacting with all of these unusual people. And these characters stuck with me, my whole life. I'm nearly 50 years old now, and I was doing this when I was in my late teens. And so, these characters really stuck with me. And I knew there was a story there, but because they're all so nice, it took a long time to come up with a villain or something that would be a real hook for the story.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. What a fascinating job. It's amazing how a job that isn't necessarily that fascinating can be made much more interesting because of the people you meet.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So tell us about some of your main characters.
So in the book, we have the protagonist who for a long time didn't have a name at all. But when I was going through, I realized I should probably give her a name. And I realized all of the other characters just called her Honey. And I thought, well, she can be Honey. That can be her name, which is not that unusual a name here in the South. I'm at home for a visit at the moment, and there are certainly some honeys around me, I'm sure. She is a young woman who she's a little naive. She's a smart girl. She's book smart. She's trying to do a master's degree at a local university, but she's pretty naive to all the things that are going on around her. She has a Turkish boyfriend who is based on some of the Bulgarian musician characters, based on actual exchange students that I met kind of at the time, although the characters themselves are entirely fake. They would be surprised to learn that that any of these characters were really based on them. But we did have a kind of a diaspora of Bulgarian musicians and other foreign students for some reason in Central Arkansas in 1998. So she has this Turkish boyfriend who's a very nice young man, but he might be having to leave. She has her colleagues who work with her at the store, who are local girls through and through. They have ambitions to be managers at the store, but they don't really necessarily see life outside of the local area. And then she has a woman who turns up kind of out of nowhere, who's a stranger, whose name is Lisa, who seems like a maternal figure at first, but there's something going on with Lisa, and we're not really sure what it is.
Okay. And her parents come into it as well, but they don't seem that close.
No, her parents are very distant from her, and they've always been very distant from her. Authors often bring themselves into books. In this case, about her parents, I can't say that they're in any way like my parents were. I didn't actually grow up with my mother and father. I grew up with my grandmother, who was a very doting, very loving person. So I didn't experience the neglect that Honey did in her childhood. But I think that the way her childhood is described is not at all dissimilar to many people's childhood, where they're in the 80s and 90s, where often kids were kind of left to their own devices.
Yeah. And did you change the premise of the book throughout the years as you were writing it? Did you keep coming up with new ideas and going back and editing it and changing it?
Oh, definitely. Definitely I did. So at the beginning, there was no university subplot. There was really no villain. It took me going to the United Kingdom and meeting a particularly horrible manager at one of my jobs to actually come up with a villain for the story. What it was at first was just a collection of very sweet little vignettes about unusual people. But it took someone that I was close to reading these vignettes and saying, yeah, that's boring. I don't really want to read anymore. Where I thought, okay, well, I've got to hang a story around this. And it took a long time to kind of figure out what that story was going to be. But I started thinking about the particular societal pressures that we had happening in America, in the South, especially in the late 90s. And what we had at the time was Bill Clinton, who's a Southerner from Arkansas, was in office, but he was going through a very seedy scandal at the time, which kind of changed the tenor of the conversations we were having about statesmen, I think possibly leading to where we are today, because, more and more behavior became more and more acceptable to talk about and maybe even to do, but, we won't go into that. We also had in Mexico at the time, there was an economic downturn, which meant that the southern United States was experiencing a lot more immigration, both legal and illegal. There was the deindustrialization of the American steel industry. The steel belt had become the rust belt. So there was a lot of economic downturn in the North, which was leading to kind of where we are today as well. We're stuck in that deindustrialization. And also there was a burgeoning meth and opioid epidemic that was just kind of starting to get to grips with people. So when I was thinking about the pressures that Americans were facing, especially in the South at that time, I thought, in 1998, everything felt pretty good, but we just didn't know what was coming. We were like honey in a lot of ways. We didn't know what was ahead of us, but it was all right in front of our faces. And so I thought, I know what I'm going to do. And I was able to put this story together, and I kind of included all of those elements, hopefully to some degree of success anyway.
Yeah, nice. So you really set the scene for the late 90s.
Yes, absolutely.
Was it fun going back there, looking at the research going into popular culture and politics and music and films and things of the time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I did try to research everything very carefully. There's one scene where I wanted the moon to be, barely in the sky. But because of the dates that the book is actually set on, I looked back at the moon phases and I was like, it was a full moon then. I have to figure out how to make this a full moon instead. But yeah, I did research things very carefully. I was looking at what music was, top of the pops at the time. I was thinking about what kinds of things she would have been listening to, what she would have been watching. I made a Spotify playlist as well that goes along with the book that kind of includes a lot of both country music and popular music of the time that Honey would have been listening to. Yeah, it was like a little trip down memory lane. I think I even had my original planner from 1998 in front of me so I could look at the dates. I managed to find it in a little book that I had dug out of my stash of papers.
Oh,
so
nice.
that was in itself a little piece of memory for me.
Fun. So what's next for you? Are you writing something else, a full-length novel perhaps?
So yes, I have been thinking about something else kind of set in the same area. What I'm thinking about doing is a cross between like White Lotus and Deliverance, but set on the shores of Lake Conway, which is certainly not a place that anyone would think of as a luxury resort, but maybe someone's going to try to make it one. And maybe some horrible things might happen as a result of that. I don't know. kind of envisioned that one as a horror romp, but it could turn into something more serious.
Yeah.
And I've also kind of started doing a fictionalized memoir, sort of an autofiction. I was inspired by Bret Easton Ellis's Shards, if anyone has read that, where he's describing his childhood, but he's interwoven this storyline of a serial killer within it, and like trying to unpick what is the truth from what is the fiction is a lot of fun. So I was thinking about doing something kind of like that. I don't know which way I'm going to go. I have both of those actively. I'm working on both of those actively at the moment. So we'll see which one kind of takes precedence over the next couple of months.
Yeah, exciting. Well, in the meantime, listeners can get a copy of 6 Miles Store. It's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by A.M. Belsey that we've been chatting with today. Angel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been lots of fun.
The Book Show with Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Bren Gosling. He's an alumnus of City University's Novel Studio and was a finalist of the London, Brighton and Exeter Short Story Prizes. His novel Street Sweeper won the Novel London Literary Prize in 2021 and the inaugural Book Edit Writers Prize for underrepresented writers. The book explores race, sexuality and love. It's a compelling story of the lives of 2 men in early 2000s London. Welcome to the Book Show, Bren.
Thank you, Hannah.
Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about the background to this novel. What inspired it?
Actually, it's quite an interesting question because I think if you ask a lot of writers, how did they start writing? What was their trigger for it? And for me, I'd always written, my background is an occupational therapist. My other life, I'd set up a private practice for physio and OT about 30 odd years ago. That was my main career. And I'd written for journals, conference papers and things like that, but I've never really dipped into creative writing until I went through a period of very debilitating chronic fatigue syndrome, ME. Quite a lot in the news now, but this is going back to about 2003. I was very gym fit, going to the gym 3-4 times a week, very social person. And I was just knocked for 6. And within 6 months, I was housebound, more or less in a wheelchair. And I needed someone to, just cook for me and things like that. I could just about get to the loo. I was severely affected. And I had to learn to walk again. So it took 2 years to learn to walk again.
Oh, goodness.
I started off at 2.5 minutes. I remember walking down to the patio and back. And then a year later, I was doing 35 minutes. So overall, it took 5 years. Coming out of that, quite a dark period in my life, I thought I want to reprioritize my time. I want to explore writing. So when I was well enough, I actually had a volunteer come and visit me. And he encouraged me to put a few words down. And I didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest. But what inspired me for this story started then when I was coming out of that illness. And I used to lie on the sofa or on a mattress in my living room and look out of the window. We had a big Victorian house with a big sort of like bay window, listening to Radio 4 mostly. My partner would go to work, leave me a pile of sandwiches. I'd crawl to the loo, come back, flop down and just watch the world from my window. I couldn't tolerate the light from the TV screen, which is not uncommon. And I spotted a street sweeper every day. I just watched the rhythm of the world turn from my front window. And everything slows down and things that, normally I probably wouldn't have blinked an eye at, you start to focus on. And so I saw this young chap and I thought, I wonder where his backstory is. That's interesting. And, where has he come from? And that really started the story. And in my writing, generally, I like to bring to the fore hidden narratives. So ordinary people can't have very extraordinary lives, but you don't often hear those stories. And I wanted to bring that to life in some way. So the other character was a natural choice because I have quite a lot of Black heritage, Jamaican, Caribbean heritage, queer, gay friends. And I know from their stories how difficult the time they had with their background, coming out and things like that. And remember, this is going back. The story is set in 2002. So I was kind of interested in those sorts of struggles, and pitting an age difference sort of romance, really, with two men in London, which is, a multicultural mix, everything's going on. And I thought it'd be quite interesting to set it before the advent of digital dating and all the apps.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm talking. You have to stop me.
No, it's interesting. I want to ask you a few things about different things that you've said. It just from the point of view of being a street sweeper, it's one of those jobs where I bet not many people will speak to them. You know what I mean? It's one of those jobs where I bet a lot of people will just walk past them and completely ignore them, and that must feel very strange.
Yeah, I mean, I probably was the same. I just go down to the tube, Walthamstow Central. You kind of sometimes notice somebody, you whiz by and you've got your thoughts ahead of the day and your day, not somebody else's day. So, what I did is, as I say, it took quite a long time to recover. And I took some creative writing courses at City University, actually short writing, and then they encouraged me to apply for their novel studio course. That actually brought 3 early chapters of the book, Street Sweeper. And I spent a lot of time researching, obviously, because I'm not a street sweeper. And I spent time at the depot, the cleansing depot in Waltham Forest. And I shadowed a street sweeper for the day. And also I visited a Pentecostal church for the other main character's story. And I interviewed people like younger immigrants from Kosovo who'd been involved in the Kosovan War. I don't quite know where I got the idea for the Kosovan War, but when I began, I remembered it as being quite prominent in the news, maybe 5 or longer years before. But then it just seemed to fade and nobody talked about Kosovo anymore. So I just thought that's kind of interesting because, what's happened to all these people? And London being sort of such a melting pot, I just thought it's quite interesting to explore the margins a bit, really.
Yeah, definitely. And what was it like when you shadowed this street sweeper?
Well, I'm trying to remember what time. I think it was probably in the summer, so it was quite a hot day. And I have to usually wear an high visibility garment, so I didn't. But I mean, I shadowed a guy that did the village actually, but it wasn't the one by that time that I'd seen through my window. It was another guy, an older guy. It was kind of so foreign from my own experience. Although I'd done manual work, like early on in my life, and my parents worked in factories and things, I never experienced sweeping up publicly in the street in full view of everybody else. So it was quite interesting to see what people dropped, which streets and bits of streets were most dirty, because it was my own neighbourhood, really. I mean, obviously wider in the bits that I didn't know so much. So, yeah, and just I noticed, like the sounds of the brush sweeping, things like that. I mean, maybe people think I'm a bit odd, but, you just pick up on things. Just the sound of a broad-headed broom striking the pavement. It really helped me try to feel the character.
And did anybody say hello to him?
I can't remember,
I don't
think so. I can't remember. I don't remember, no. We're all kind of, especially in London, people just,
Everyone's busy.
Getting up. Yeah. And actually, there are quite a lot of, at that time anyway, casual workers. So people didn't stay, street sweepers didn't necessarily stay on the same beat. Like, you might have had, like when I was growing up in the 70s, Provincial you had still had a postman that was there for about maybe 20 years. Or I can even just about remember we had a baker's van come round. So you'd know people by name in the local sweet shop. So you'd know people. But in London, London's anonymous to a large extent. I mean, not completely. I'm interested in, how you find community. That's one of the things I'm very interested in writing about. But generally, if you're an incomer, I think it can be quite tough.
Yeah.
Quite tough.
So tell us about your 2 main characters and how they meet.
Ah, right. Okay. Basically, the story is set in London over the Golden Jubilee summer of 2002. And the main character is a 20-year-old Kosovan boy called Almir. Well, that's his new name. He's come to Britain as a witness protected person, an ex-boy soldier from the Kosovan War. And he's given a job as a street sweeper in Walthamstow. And he's plagued by nightmares of the war, post-traumatic stress, and the foreignness of everything. He's trying to hold down that job. He's living in a bedsit at the top of the market, quite lonely. Anyway, he starts off sweeping the streets in central Walthamstow, and he comes across something which throws him back into a traumatic event that he was involved in the war. I won't give too much away. It's a plot spoiler. And that throws him off work. When he comes back to work, the cleansing depot give him a kinder beat, which is nicer, which is Walthamstow Village, which is becoming gentrified part of Walthamstow. Now it's very gentrified. And so it's less stressful. And when he's back to work, he's encouraged back to work by a volunteer. She's one of there are a couple of secondary characters. I'll come back to them. Anyway, he gets back on his feet, helped by this volunteer woman called Julie. One day when he's sweeping up in the village in Walthamstow, he sees the other character, Roland, who's recently moved to escape his Pentecostal past in Brixton to Walthamstow Village. He's renting a new flat, just moved there. He's out playing basketball. There's a practice field in Walthamstow Village. He's out there. And so that's how they kind of stare each other out. And again, I can't give too much away. There's another plot spoiler if I do.
Yeah, no
but they connect through basketball, because when Almir was younger, he dreamed about playing pro basketball for the national team, but the war got in the way and everything changed. And here he is sweeping up streets in London at 21, something he could never have imagined.
Yeah.
And here he is. And he sees this guy, playing hoop, and he wants to join. Anyway, they become friends loosely, and they end up having sex. Almir can't reconcile with being gay. Roland has just come out, even at 40. There's a lot here. He's come out only at 40 because his mum's recently died, and his Pentecostal past sort of precludes all that. Also, Roland's got a 15-year-old boy. He's got a 15-year-old son.
Wow.
Who's 40. The son is a bright kid, a bit troubled, but not cliche. So and he wants to live with his dad, and so it all kind of like trips everything up as the relationship between Almir, 21-year-old Kosovan street sweeper, and Roland, who's a council surveyor in Haringey. They kind of like become closer, and they have sex, then it becomes something deeper, and they're both struggling to understand where it's going, the age difference, and the boy kind of wants to know what's going on, and it's kind of like progresses. But eventually...
Well, don't tell us too much.
No. It's a hopeful story. It's not like a misery story.
No.
I mean, it's contemporary fiction. So I wouldn't label it. I think if any of your listeners think, I don't want to buy a book about two men in love, put that aside, please, because it's a contemporary fiction novel.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to humanity. It speaks to all people's experience about love, relationships, estrangement in different places. And actually, a lot of your audience, I guess, they're expat Brits, so that Spain is not London from Kosovo, but, it's kind of got its own culture and way of doing things, I guess.
Yeah. Well, if people want to get a copy of Street Sweeper, it's out now. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Bren Gosling, who we've been chatting with. Bren, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to The Book Show with Hannah Murray on TRE.
Joining us on the line now is writer Alice Lee, who lives in Cyprus. She's with us on the Book Show to talk about her new novel, What I Told My Friends. It's a gripping, dark academia novel inspired in part by Alice's memories of her own school days, a time when every emotion is heightened. The book explores what happens when relationships are tested and when we carry unresolved trauma, using the setting of an elite all-girls boarding school. Welcome to the Book Show, Alice.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you.
It's lovely to have you with us. So can you tell us a bit about your school days and what inspired this book?
Yes. I really enjoyed my school days for the most part. I had a great time there studying the things that I enjoyed, but I always remember the complexities of the friendships that we had. And I went through a couple of years of quite significant bullying. And I remember just going to school every day, feeling really miserable and not wanting to be there. And I think that was really expressed in this novel.
Oh, and were you at an all-girls boarding school?
I was not, actually. I was at a mixed school. I think I would have probably quite enjoyed a boarding school in many ways, but it was not the kind of environment that I went to school in. But it was certainly the kind of environment that I think it gives you that great atmosphere for a novel like a dark academia thriller. You can really play with the environment, with the building, with the characters. And I think Away from Home, everything is much more intensified in terms of an emotional perspective from the characters. So that's why I chose to set it at an all-girls school.
Yeah, that makes sense. So tell us about your main characters.
Okay, so our main character is Chloe. And Chloe is a person that has been struggling with what happened at school for the last 20 years. The complex things that happened there have really stayed with her because she knew that she played a really significant part in how they all panned out. So we're meeting her 20 years after the main story, and she's standing outside the prison gates where she's waiting to meet her old music teacher. Chloe was able to secure a scholarship for this prestigious all-girls school, and Mr. Ades was the teacher that she met when she started working there. And they developed a very difficult and inappropriate relationship, which was driven by the teacher. And so she now is living a life 20 years down the line where not only is she trying to manage the traumatic things that happened to her when she was younger, she's also trying to come to terms with the fact that she also made some very difficult choices, which resulted in his going to prison for a crime that he did not necessarily commit. And so we're meeting her at a real crux in her life where she's trying to not only understand the things that happened to her, but the things that she proactively drove forward herself.
So with a plot like this that obviously has twists and things, do you have to plan it all out beforehand so you know exactly where you're going with the story? How does it work?
I really wish that I was that kind of writer, actually. I think it would be a much more economical process to be able to sit down and have a solid plan before I begin. But I find that for me, writing the first draft is often a period of discovery. So I set out with an idea of what it's going to be, but it very rarely sticks to that plan. And then I find myself just process after process, just draft after draft, really trying to refine the plot. And that's when most of the twists come in. I have to get to know the characters really as we move through the writing process in order to know how they will react with each other and what kind of twists will be possible.
Yeah. And have you always written like that, do you think?
I think so. I think I've got a lot better at planning over the years. I've been writing for a long time, but for me, trying to secure a plot before I approach it just doesn't work. So I have to accept that level of uncertainty and having to try a few things out, which invariably means a lot of rewriting and a lot of words that end up getting deleted. But I find it's the best process for me to end up with a story that not only has the twists and turns that I would want my thriller to have, but also that has an element of surprise, because often the twists are something that come to me as a surprise as well.
Yeah. And what about the characters? Do they unfold as you're writing, or do you plan them a bit in advance?
I plan them a little bit in advance. I think you have to have a little bit of an idea about what you want to write about. So in a book like this, for example, I knew I was going to write about somebody who was about to start attending a very prestigious school, who didn't come from that kind of background, who didn't understand the social dynamics of the environment that she found herself in. But the rest of it very much comes through the process of writing. I always say that the first couple of drafts, it feels a bit like moving pawns around on a chessboard. I'm trying to make them do the things that I think they're going to do. And then as the characters interact with each other in the settings that I put them in, I start to see which bit works, which bit doesn't work. And that's how their character and their personality starts to develop.
Yeah. So are we in two different settings in the book then? The school and what happened in the school, and then 20 years later?
Yes, it's a dual timeline novel. So we've got the vast majority of chapters are happening 20 years ago when the girls were at school. So you have this very gothic setting on the south coast of England, a sort of Hogwarts kind of place, like a castle, an old manor house. And then we also have the modern day setting, which is taking place in London.
Okay. And do you write one sort of setting at a time and then weave them together, or do you write it as it appears in the book?
I write it pretty much as it appears in the book. I have I very rarely write one period and then write the next period, because I find much in the way that the development of the characters comes through the writing, the development of the environments also comes through. I might set out with an idea that I'm going to write something only in the past, so this previous narrative, but then very early on I'll realize that we actually need to know something about the modern day setting as well. So they very much get created alongside each other simultaneously.
I know you've also written books under the pseudonym Michelle Adams. What differentiates those books from Alice Lee books?
Yes, Michelle Adams was the first name that I wrote under. And what differentiates them really is the voice that we're bringing to the novels. So Michelle Adams released 2 books which were thrillers. The first one was back in 2017. But then for sort of personal reasons, I chose to move towards women's fiction. And that sort of set a distinction between the Michelle Adams writer and a thriller writer. I wrote a book called Little Wishes that was inspired by a difficult period that I'd been through in my life, which was when my father passed away from lung cancer. And so that really changed the kind of books that I wrote under that name. So when I returned to thrillers, it seemed only right to try to start afresh with a new name.
Yeah, nice. So would you go back to writing books under Michelle Adams, or have you moved away from that style for good, do you think?
I think I've moved away from Michelle Adams, although it's sort of a never say never kind of situation, because I always believe that the stories that a writer writes often comes to them quite naturally. And I didn't set out to write women's fiction either. When I first started writing thrillers, that was very much the genre that I loved. But the stories came as a desire to write them. And so I do let myself be led by the things that I'm inspired by and the stories that I want to write. So it's a never say never, but I think that for the most part now I'll be writing under the name Alice Lee.
Fair enough. And could there be a sequel, or will it definitely be a standalone?
This book, I think, is definitely a standalone. There are a couple of reviewers that said to me that I've left the door open for a sequel, which I suppose is possible, but I don't think it's something that I'm going to write. I certainly wouldn't want to write it just for the sake of writing it, because people wanted to read it. But I think if the story came to me, I would, but I don't think as it stands that this book will be a sequel.
Okay. Well, if people want to get a copy of What I Told My Friends, it's out now. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Alice Lee, who we've been chatting with. Alice, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You're listening to Hannah Murray on The Book Show.
Joining us on the line now is Guy Lloyd. He's the International Sales Manager for Penguin Random House and joins us once a month to talk all things books. How are you, Guy?
Very well indeed, Hannah. Thank you, and good to be with you again.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. So this is really interesting. The New York Times has dropped a freelance journalist after a book review. How and why?
Well, this is an odd one. And you're right. The New York Times has dropped a freelance journalist called Alex Preston, who used AI when writing a book review of a novel called Watching Over Her by a novelist called Jean-Baptiste Andrea. And the review appeared some weeks ago in the New York Times, but a very eagle-eyed New York Times reader contacted the paper subsequently to say that Preston's review had a number of very similar phrases used by a journalist called Christabel Kent in The Guardian when she had reviewed the same book last August. So when the New York Times confronted Alex Preston, he admitted he'd used AI to write the review, and he didn't know that chunks of the Guardian review had been lifted. And I think he then issued a statement saying he'd made a serious mistake and that he was hugely embarrassed, but he's been dropped. And I think this is a kind of salutary tale of beware how you use AI.
Yeah.
Because, of course, if you are looking for book reviews of a particular book, it may well be that it hasn't been reviewed that many times, so that it's not like searching on a very, very broad subject where you will just get a general text and it's impossible to to nail down specifically where it's come. If it hasn't been reviewed very often, AI is going to lift chunks from what it already knows. And in some cases, and clearly in this case, that involved lifting phrases verbatim from the review in The Guardian. So, yes, beware when using AI.
Gosh, that's a cautionary tale, isn't it? Definitely.
Isn't it really? Yeah.
Yeah, because there's no way of knowing, is there? If you look up something in AI asking for a review or asking just a question or whatever it might be, there's no way of knowing, A, whether the information is correct, or B, where it's come from.
No, I mean, I don't know in how much detail Alex Preston read the book. And it may well be that he was under a deadline, he skimmed it, and thought, well, I need a bit of backup here. I could be doing him a disservice. He might have read it and just decided to research AI for other reasons. But I think you need to use your own words at the end of the day. However much AI can be a help, the words that come out onto the page at the end need to be your own.
Yeah, particularly if you're being paid to write an article or paid to do a review. I mean, that's your job.
Yeah, quite so. It's the equivalent of borrowing someone else's essay on the bus.
Yeah, definitely. I saw this week, really fascinating, Frida McFadden has revealed herself.
She has indeed, in a manner of speaking. And if you don't know who Frida McFadden is, then shame on you, because you haven't been listening to Hannah Murray's chart rundown on the book show.
Yes.
Because Frida McFadden must be your most mentioned name in the last year, I would think.
Oh, I reckon. Absolutely. She's just incredible. And I've read quite a few of her books, and I'm continuing to do so.
Well, yeah. For the uninitiated, she writes very popular fiction, and she's extraordinarily prolific. She is more than a book a year. We tend to refer in the trade to a book a year author as someone who is very quick, very consistent, very reliable. She is far more than that. And all of her books are either Sunday Times or New York Times #1s, or both, or their fixtures in the top 10s. And she may be best known for a book called The Housemaid, because it was made into a film last year starring Sydney Sweeney, which was hugely successful. It grossed over $400 million. So she's getting well known on other platforms as well as just for her books. But she has been more secretive about her identity than most authors. She has a nom de plume. There's nothing particularly unusual in that. But unlike most authors, we tend to know their real name, or their real name isn't particularly a mystery. So people tended to know that Jean le Carré wasn't his real name and he was actually David Cornwell. But Frida McFadden was almost sort of Banksy-like in protecting her identity, down to the fact that she would only appear in public wearing a wig. She's later claimed, since her identity has been revealed, that she's going to carry on wearing a wig because it saves wondering how she's going to do her hair. But she decided to reveal her identity partly to scotch online rumours that Frida McFadden didn't exist, which must have been very galling. And even more galling were there were some online rumours that said she was a writing team of 3 men.
Oh, goodness.
So now it's official. She's not 3 men. She is one woman called Sarah Cohen. But what I find really amazing is that, and I mentioned she's prolific, 27 novels since 2013, which is more than 2 a year, I think. She has a full-time job as a doctor who treats brain disorders. Now, that's hardly a few hours volunteering.
No.
So where she finds the time to write, I've no idea. But hats off to her. And yes, well, maybe not wigs off to her, but certainly hats off to her because she's been extraordinarily successful. And she holds down a completely other life as well.
That's seriously impressive, isn't it? As you say, that sounds like a complicated job that requires a lot of concentration and skill. So to be doing that and churning out 2 best-selling novels a year is amazing.
I wouldn't even be thinking about writing if I did the job that she did.
No. Wow. Okay. And sadly, Len Dayton, a legendary spy thriller author, died recently at the age of 97.
He did. He died in March, and he was really the man who redefined spy fiction. And spy novels were actually in vogue in the early 60s due to the success of James Bond by Ian Fleming. And Dayton had already written the Ipcress file in the early 60s, but it was very much as a sideline because he was already making a living as a graphic artist, but his timing, as it turned out, was actually spot on. And it wasn't just because of the Bond films, but because the real Cold War was ratcheting up. The Berlin Wall had recently been built. The Cuban Missile Crisis was in the same year as when the Ipcress file came out. So I think as a result, it was a hit almost immediately. But I think the main difference was that the principal character of Harry Palmer, who was the spy, he was an ordinary grammar school boy. And he came from Burnley, which was a world away from James Bond. And it was why Michael Caine played him in the film, not because Michael Caine is a Lancastrian, but because he was a working-class character. And the success of that inspired a whole series of novels featuring Harry Palmer as the main character. And he very much reflected Dayton's own background, which was very working-class, although he was born in London. His parents worked as a cook and a chauffeur. Then Dayton himself did a variety of jobs. He was a cabin steward for a while on the old BOAC airline, which older listeners may remember. And he said his claim to fame was that he once served Agatha Christie a cup of coffee as a steward.
Oh,
I don't know whether that inspired him to write, but it's a good story.
Yeah.
He was also a magazine illustrator, a book jacket designer. He'd actually gone to St. Martin's School of Art, which was why he was able to do his design job. And he was also a great cook, so he was very talented. And he was a cook to such an extent that he wrote cartoon strip recipes for The Observer, which were themselves turned into cookbooks. And he simply regarded himself as a jobbing writer. He was very self-deprecating. And in one interview, he described himself as the most illiterate writer ever, which seems very cruel indeed. But for an illiterate, he also wrote a comic novel. He edited a wine guide. He wrote a TV play for the old Armchair Theatre series that was on in the 60s and 70s. And he was a travel editor for Playboy magazine. and apart from that, he wrote 21 novels. So he leaves an enormous body of work, but I think he will always be associated with the Ipcress file, which in turn will always be associated with Michael Caine.
Yeah. Gosh, what a talent. It is amazing what some people achieve in their lives, isn't it?
Isn't it? And from very humble backgrounds as well. He just appeared to have great timing as well as great talent and be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Guy Lloyd, thank you very much for being with us. Always lovely to chat with you. Have a wonderful month ahead, and we look forward to catching up with you again in May.
Thanks very much, Hannah. You too.
You've been listening to a TRE production. If you've enjoyed this programme, there'll be another episode waiting for you next week, right here on this platform, where you can also access our extensive back catalogue of shows and interviews. For more information on our live programming, social media channels and apps, and how to contact Talk Radio Europe, please visit tre.radio.